I like to take the approach in terms of profitability and projections. Do we have enough coming in design fees, separate and apart from product, to cover our fixed costs? Because if the answer to that on an annual basis is we do, then any additional product markup will cover anything fluctuating and out of budget.
Welcome to the podcast today. We have Julia Nikishina with us. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I had to take an outtake there on the last name, which should have been easy. I tried to do a good job welcoming guests on here. But you're owner founder of New Age Financial Consulting, and I was really fortunate to get to know you at Design Camp not too long ago.
Yeah, we had a great talk.
Mm-hmm.
We could have continued for hours.
I know, and you have so much going on, and it was pretty amazing. Lindsay, and Anastasia, who had me come out and speak on the panel, and I know Lindsay talked about the amazing things that you've done for her and her business on the financial world. And, as business owners, I think a lot of us are creatives, or we understand, construction or design, but we don't spend enough time in the financial side. So from your side, Julia, what do you think is, why did you focus just on mostly interior designers?
So it's a really great question. I think it really just happened for us, or for me, organically. So one of my very first clients independently back in 2008 is a design firm, and they're a larger firm, and they're still a client to this day, which is even more amazing. It makes me love them genuinely so much more. They were a big firm in Philadelphia, and they used a really specific niche software, which really grew on me. And it was back then too, it's grown a lot more. So it's called Studio Designer, and it's expanded and grown a lot more since then. But it was so unique and detailed from the accounting side. And I really loved it. Like, I loved how not only how granular it was, but how important all of the back end accounting was. And it's so my personality, right? I mean, it's so like, similar to probably what you do. Like, we work with creatives, so the creatives are not at all focused on that, but I am. And so I loved it. And really from that first day, we just grew. And nowadays we only work with interior designers and only work with studio designer. So clients, I would say, call us regularly, call us all the time. But we will not work with them unless they're willing to migrate and really invest in and adapt this software and this program and these processes to help them operate and function in their business at a higher level.
It's amazing. And, from your perspective, as you've been working with designers, how have you seen their business change, as they get a really strong grip on financials and understanding forecast and, everything that goes into their business? How have you seen either their growth or confidence or just financial stability change?
So the interior design industry is fascinating, right? And it's really made up of two segments. There's everything having to do with billing for time, right? So whether you're flat fee or hourly, and then everything having to do with product. And though you can completely mess up both aspects, the product side is actually, I find, even more difficult to track correctly. And so this particular software especially will really sort of open up your deficiencies, but also allow you to understand where you're making markup, what your margin is. Are you doing a good job? Are you recouping freight costs? And are you making money project by project? And so that's what we're consistently trying to teach and trying to get the design firms to understand, whether it be autonomously or really hand in hand with us, but that way they're actually looking at the data. So it could go both ways. I mean, clients could really learn and understand that, wow, they're doing really well in certain categories, or that they're on the other side and they're really not doing well in certain categories, or they've really sort of priced themselves incorrectly, or their markup is too low, or they're not marking up freight. Like all these different components. And it's such a fascinating industry where there's no industry standard. I mean, we talk about it all the time. And so people are just, firms are every which way you could think of it. I'm sure it's being done.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And so as you look at this, when you mentioned there's no industry standard, and it is complicated from, designers understanding, you bring up the freight, which is a good example. Are there three common mistakes, or maybe not specifically three, but what are some of the common mistakes you see with designers as you're working with them, where they're just either missing opportunities for revenue or not capturing revenue or costs properly, for their projects?
So I think number one is not tracking time. And that's probably in any industry, maybe even similar. I'd be
Hmm.
curious to know how you do it
Yeah.
in the building side. I mean, even in accounting, right? Like it goes
Hmm.
back to any we're in a client service space, whether we're in a interior design firm or an accounting firm. And so if we're billing by the hour, we obviously need to be tracking our time. And if we're billing flat fee, we need to be tracking our time. And so then you have firms and principals saying, "Well, I'm doing really well. I'm billing flat fees." And then the follow up question to that should be, well, that's great, but how much time did you actually spend? And so if there's not a concrete answer to that, and if there's no statistics behind it, right, you actually have no clue how you're doing. You have no clue. You're running blind there. That's a big question, and it's a big process. Like right at that, that's a top level question, and then it trickles down of how do you track time? How detailed do you need it to be? Are you fixed fee? Or are you hourly? Are you both? Do you bill as a percentage of construction, right? So that's a really big topic for a lot of firms. Freight is another one. Freight is tricky, super tricky. And parts of this industry, like, again, I say all the time, it seems a little bit backwards. We're like stuck in, I don't know, 1985 maybe. It's people are still faxing, like, right. Not everybody, some of the vendors especially are, I think, are more old school, which actually really isn't helping us, right? But freight is a really challenging part of this industry. It's consistently estimated, right? It's fluctuating. And if you're not tuned in to understand what your true freight costs are versus your actual, it goes back to the same of, well, you're making a lot of money on flat fees, but you have no idea how much time you're spending. It's the same. Freight is a big one. Receiving and storage, right? If you're working with the receiver with the
Hmm.
warehouse, that's another one. It just eats into, if you told the client it was going to be 15% of the total spend, and the project ran over because of construction, because of somebody on the builder side, what do you do? How do you account for that? And really price changes. I think that's another sort of big one too. Like if there's price changes, what does your contract say? Everything should go back to your contract. Can you pass along price changes to the client?
I think these are really important points. And one of them I want to talk about is freight and storage because, uh, you know, from what I've seen just from a building side and you look at the design side, I mean, building schedules are taking much longer. So original
Mhm.
forecasts, they're not hitting that. I would imagine that for most designers, their builders are not hitting dates. So things are getting pushed out. I know it's happening on my side, right? And so this gets prolonged and there are major fees happening monthly for storage. And especially if you have a lot of big furniture and lighting packages, there's a cost to that. And so how do you work with your clients to really hone in on, say, that line item specifically to make sure that they are capturing and that they are really checking and auditing and making sure that they're, bidding it properly or at least capturing the cost back?
So I think transparency goes a long way. So when you're getting into the procurement stage of the project, and once you start ordering, and to be very frank with the client, to say, please understand, right? You're receiving. We estimated X amount of dollars for receiving and storage. Please understand if the project runs long, those costs will escalate, and to really make sure that they understand and acknowledge that they see it, and you're consistently, you're showing them all the reports, you're showing them their total spend, so that way they're not flying blind, and then they're not in the dark, right? Because those clients are the ones that are going to get the most angry, and they're going to get right. That's going to build and build and build as the project goes on. Receiving is, I think it's tough. Um, and who holds that contract with the receiver too? Like that's another question, and that's something else that needs to be worked out in the contract phase between the firm and the client. Who's going to be paying the receiver? Are you marking up the receiver? And then who holds all of the additional insurance? Insurance is
Mhm.
given to that receiver, right? That's another question. We just had a fascinating situation, actually, where we have a client that is a firm that's going into starting a project in New York, which is fantastic. So they reached out to us to say, "You're in New York all the time. Do you have any receivers?" I'm like, "Yeah, check out, so and so." And I said, just as a reminder, make sure you follow up on who's holding the riders for the insurance premiums if you're storing a really big project. And so that then led to the question of, well, who's holding riders on their current insurance? And it really turns out that actually nobody is or was. The client wasn't insuring the product with additional riders, and the firm wasn't, and the receiving warehouse wasn't. So it was a learning opportunity to be able to say, you know what, not only does our, meaning the firm's contract, need to be buttoned up, but our conversation with the insurance, with the receiver, needs to be buttoned up. Like if there's a total loss, what happens?
Yeah. 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 And it's really important you bring that up because if all three parties aren't carrying it and then all of a sudden there is a loss or a fire or ours or a theft or whatever,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it
Oh, yeah.
happens.
I mean, it happens, and like think about the volume of the projects that so many, like you're working on, and
Mhm.
we're working with the firms on. I mean, they're millions and millions of dollars per project.
Yeah.
Like we're not talking about storing $250,000 worth of furniture.
Hmm.
So it was. I always look at all those things as like, oh, that's such a great reminder, and all of that goes back to the everything goes back to your contract. What does your contract say?
Yeah, that's it's such an important aspect, and I'm glad you brought up the receiving side because I'd imagine, well, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but probably a lot of the designers are outsourcing, um, their furniture to other receivers and storage, companies that are
Yes.
managing that for them. Some may have it in house. If they do have it in house, like I'm sure you're working with them to make sure that they're charging adequately and covering costs, and very similar to what they would do if they would outsource it.
Yes, I think it's really hard. I mean, it's funny. I think it could be lucrative if you could figure out how to way to do some of the storage yourself. And I would say we have probably firms that I could count on one hand. It is
Mhm.
hard, and they do make money with it, but I do find it's incredibly challenging on the logistics side, which is why the receivers are obviously so expensive, and it's such a big part of budgets.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big part, and the insurance part is very similar to me, and I'll go through the time aspect too. Is from an insurance side, we have like builder's risk policies, so the clients have to take a builder's risk. So, our insurance only covers, like general liability and personal injury
Mhm.
and vehicle, and um, things that we're actually managing. But if the project burns down, no fault of us, it's not like my plumber was, welding, sweating some copper and
Mhm.
catch a bill on fire. But if it just happens or there's a natural disaster, client could be out millions of dollars, and that's why in our contract it's adamant that they have a builder's risk. And so, to your point, as we're looking at this, Julie, is that this is where you counsel on your clients, not just from a financial advisor, advisory role, but you're also looking at this from, hey, logistically and from a legal protection, like you have to do these things.
So, question though for you. So,
Yeah.
though the contract outlines or recommends it, do you follow? Is it? Are you just expecting them to read it and understand and do their part with additional policies and premiums, or are you not willing to work with them unless they do those things?
That's a really good question. So in their contract, it's required that they get it. Still, it's not like every client even knows what that is or
Uh-huh.
may not have seen in the contract. So we have, over time we've created, our pre-construction checklist, or I'd say, our checklist from when they've approved the budget till we break ground. And there's these list of items. Builder's risk policy is one of them. So we work with them. A lot of them can get a quote from their own insurance, whoever they have for the homeowners insurance. We always have three or four options so we can get a multiple quotes. So at least, and the quotes always pertain to two things. And this is probably similar to the furniture side, is that we have to give them a build schedule. So we have to say, okay, it's a 24-month
Mhm.
build and it's going to be, here's the schedule values. Here's the total cost, $5 million for the house. And so they're getting quotes on 24 months and 5 million. Now where that comes into play is if we finish early, it's prorated, they get a refund and no problem. If we extend,
Mhm.
that's where it can get costly, and that's where we have to really, monitor that policy.
But are you then follow? So let's say it is 24 months, and they sent you. So I'm assuming they're sending you a certificate of insurance for you to see when it was effective and when it expires. But are you then following up to say, oh, I see your insurance expired. Can I have a new? Can I
We
have?
are so
Oh,
so
you
we
are.
we do track that. So we have the insurance name us as additional insured. So
Uh-huh.
that's all in there. And then we're tracking that. So this is something we focus a lot on with insurance because one thing that's tough for us as builders, even outside of kind of this high level you and I are speaking about, Julie, is that, we work with thousands of subs on all these different projects and
Mhm.
specialization. And so tracking insurance certs and making sure they're current or the right value and they're not fraudulent and they're not manufactured, it's a major deal. But fortunately for those listening, my insurance, broker who does our insurance, we pay them $1,000 a month just being open. And for $1,000 a month, their team goes through, they qualify all the certs of all the subs. They make sure their limits are correct. They make sure they're current, that we're additional insured, projects additional insured. They're checking the builder's risk policy. They're monitoring it to make sure if it's coming up to
Mhm.
need to be extended, they're like, hey, waving a white, a flag, red flag, saying, hey, Brad, make sure you get this extended. So we definitely have a team behind us because otherwise it can be pretty cumbersome.
So you're not doing anything with that on your end in terms of software or tracking the
We,
broker.
we used to, and so we used to track it, and we had, I mean, honestly, it was like this.
Oh, it
Um,
sounds like a nightmare.
it's a nightmare. Like
Yeah, yeah,
honestly, truly, I mean, it was this, and I shouldn't say antiquated because Excel can be pretty, you know, pretty
yeah,
robust. So we had
yeah,
this
yeah.
Excel file, but it wasn't great. Like even though you have it on Excel and it's very organized, there's still a manual input. There's still a manual thing that you have to check. By turning it over, now it's like out of sight, out of mind. And the
Hmm.
other benefit for those listening is that by having our broker do it, um, it actually has saved us on our yearly quotes and premiums because all these insurance companies, when they go out for bid, they know that the broker is taking this. They're verifying all the subs are insured and bonded, which protects me as the builder, protects their investment because they know that the subs, if something does happen, they do have legitimate policies that can be, hit
Hmm.
first before it hits my general contractor policy. So there are layers to that that do help on just the overall health of the business for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you're, and obviously your business is like there. I would think more risk, right? But I don't necessarily think that a lot of our, like even our firms are the greatest on it. So it's always the recommendation, obviously, to get a certificate of insurance for anyone doing labor. But how many people follow that advice?
Like none.
Well, but it's interesting if you're and I don't know enough about LA, right? We do a lot more work in New York than LA, but
Hmm.
it's a pretty good mix. But New York, you can't get into the high rises without a certificate.
Yeah.
So New York does a really good job with that. So it forces you to make sure that not only are you requesting them, but you're adding whoever as this as an additional insured, and then you're tracking all of the effective dates and the expirations. But unless you're in the boroughs, I think it's I think it's hard.
It's really hard because the one thing that New York has going for it, or any big city, or maybe any high rise, maybe in LA, possibly will have this is that where it gets complicated is if there is an issue. Let's say you're on the 45th floor and you leak in the shower. Well, that just doesn't impact
Yeah, yeah.
them, right? I mean, you have people below it, and that's where they have to make sure that those working are licensed, bond insured, because there's catastrophic collateral damage that can happen, from issues. And that's why whenever you're doing those projects, it's a little bit more stringent. The problem with like LA, where you don't have a ton of vertical construction and a lot of it's what we
Mhm.
call, it's spread out. Yeah, it's the Wild West. It's like Phoenix. There's so many builders that are cutting that corner because there is a cost to insurance. There is a cost to having people that are licensed. And for them, they're looking at it like, well, if I have my painter not licensed, I don't care. I can get the paint done for half the price. So who cares? They're going to take that risk. And that's the problem that the client doesn't see on the backside.
So are you not willing to work with a sub unless they're fully licensed and insured?
Yeah, I won't because I mean, the thing that makes it tough for me is that there are some good subs I know out there that are working for some of my competitors, and then we'll give them we have like a pre-qualification kit we send them, and they'll fill it out, and it's like incomplete. I'm like, I can't hire you, and I don't know how my peers are hiring you, but there's no way I will just because I've been burned. I think a lot of this stuff, Julie, is one. I'm trying to position our company to be an advocate for the client. So yes, is it a little bit more expensive to hire AFT than our competitor? Probably, but is their investment protected? Yeah, 100%. And I've been burned, and I have, an example now where the client, we're finished with the project, we're done. The client had someone who's unlicensed come in, do some extra work after. Well, their work impacted the stuff we finished, right?
Mhm.
So now I'm battling this, and I'm like, if this was a licensed, bonded, insured company, we could contact the insurance company, we can have some resolution. But now we're fighting this battle, trying to help the client out and get another, competitor. I mean, it's just it gets messy. And so if everything goes as planned, it's fine. But we all know how this works. Most of the time it doesn't go as planned.
And it always runs late.
Always. Always. And
Yeah.
and so I like the time aspect. You brought that up too, Julie, that you're like pushing on time because for us being cost plus, you this is something that's taken us. I've been in business 11 years, and it's really only recently that we spent a ton of time on understanding the time because that really impacts the build cost, our bids. It impacts durations. There's also if a project takes too long, even if you're capturing costs, you could be foregoing another project that could be starting, and so
Mhm.
there's that lost revenue cycle that could happen, and so tracking time is important. And you gave the example of designers charging a flat fee, and if they're not if they're tracking their hours and their flat fees not adequate, they could be working for minimum wage or something
Or yeah, I mean,
or
yes,
less.
or working for free. I mean, it's interesting. I think it happens. I think it happens a lot more than people think that it does. And also, there's always this question of like, well, which way is the right way to charge? And I am a firm. I stand by this. I'm a firm believer that there's not necessarily a right way. Right? It needs to work for the firm and it needs to work for the client. And you may have some really high end, amazing clients who absolutely just do not want to work flat fee, or vice versa. They don't want to work hourly, and I think that that's entirely okay. And I actually have found that our best and our biggest, like our best and biggest firms, and the ones that are most profitable, are really the ones that are able to cater the contract to the client, but do it in a way where they know that they're still covering all of the necessary costs associated, and they have the data again to, like, you need the metrics, otherwise you just have no clue.
Yeah, it makes it really tough. And I think the metrics are really important because the better metrics you have or the better KPIs and the better things you're tracking, it's going to put you in a much better fiscal position to really forecast now profitability, hiring, scope gaps, maybe marketing adjustments, on things you want to pursue from a PR perspective. Um, from your side, Julia, as you look at that, I would imagine as you've worked with the client for a while and understand the process, it's easier for you to kind of project maybe that year profitability. Maybe every quarter you're looking at that. How hard is it to get to that point when you just take over a company? As you're looking at forecasting profits, because if you can forecast profits, I'm sure you can work with them or their CPA on, um, you know, taxes and tax strategy and everything else with it.
So that's a great question. I think the answer is gonna be it depends, right? It really depends on how sort of neat and tidy everyone is. And so, like, for example, our clients that are tax clients, I mean, we are trying to consistently look at that on a quarterly basis, but it's going to depend on the software you use, right? So if you're in, as an example, Studio Designer, you should be absolutely looking at profit by project, and whether that be depends on the length of the project. So ongoing, but then as projects are closing out, to be able to understand, okay, well, let's look to see how did I do on product and how did I do on time. I like to take the approach in terms of profitability and projections. Do we have enough coming in design fees? So both hourly and fixed, but design fees, separate and apart from product, to cover our fixed and, I would say, for the most part, fluctuating costs, but really our fixed costs. Because if the answer to that on an annual basis is we do, then any additional product markup or margin will cover anything fluctuating and out of budget, whether it be marketing efforts or principal discretionary spending accounts or overspending. But if you go into it with that mindset, I really have found that it can be very, very helpful for your budget. But again, in any software, it's information in, information out. So if you've really solid information in, you're able to extrapolate that. If your information going in is subpar, then it'll be impossible.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting topic that you touch on this from because if you're looking at a designer from the health of the business, if they've set themselves up where their design fees can cover their bottom line, whether their salary, their
Mhm.
employees, operation, rent, and all the things that go to it, immediately that there's going to be a health of the business, especially if they're doing furnishings and product that now become,
Yeah.
the profit center.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's not, and it does change. I think that they're like, think about similar to probably your industry where projects are cyclical, but by phase, right? So we may be in a really heavy construction documentation phase, and that could be all of Q3, and so there won't be anything in terms of furniture at all across all the clients. But then in Q1, right, all of that is finished, and now we start purchasing. So that I understand, right? Because that's sort of a common, people will push back on that to say, well, it's not possible. And the answer is no, no, no. It's definitely it's definitely possible, right? I mean, you could make sure that the design fees cover all fixed costs. We also really like to look at design fees in relation to salary. And so again, forget product, forget anything related to FF&E. Where do your design fees, fixed and hourly, fall into relation to your total salary spend?
Hmm. So, when you look at, I mean, that sounds like a pretty straightforward KPI. Um, How difficult is that when you're working with a client to make sure that they are charging appropriately for their design fee to make sure they're capturing salary?
We talk, so with newer clients coming in, we talk a lot about just really your hourly rates, like what are you charging and how does that compare to an industry with no industry standards? But just from our perspective, right? If we're working with 100 designers, how does your hourly rate fall into what I'm seeing? And so we have our super high end, AD 100 firms and what they're charging, and then people on the lower side, and then everybody else in between. But there's some repeat information in there, right? So a really nice size healthy firm is going to charge 300 to 400 for a principal, right? And so if you're a new firm coming to us, how does your rate fall in line in there? And where are you obviously geographically? That really, really matters. New York, LA is New York, LA. Nobody's going to come close to that. But even if you're in Atlanta, Georgia, and you're doing amazing projects, and right there all across the country, that says something. So your rates should reflect that. And even if you're fixed fee, your contract, every single one of your contracts should still technically go out to say, if we go above scope, these are my hourly rates, and then you decide from there. So right, it's like a business agreement. It's like a prenup, right? I mean, it's your safety net where you could then decide if you're going to charge for it, if it's truly out of scope. You don't have to, but you get to. Or you get to do something that's a favorite of mine to send a client a bill that very clearly shows all the hours spent, and then it shows your rate, but it's no charge. So they understand as a first time offender, oh shoot, right, I am on a fixed fee. I'm on my seventh reselection, but I was only given three. So and so decided to not charge, and right, and then they see the detail. But then if that type of behavior continues, it's a really sort of nice way to let a client understand, listen, you're out of scope, I've been working with you, but like we can't continue this type of relationship because it's impacting all these different things in my business.
Yeah, it's really good insight. I think it's always valuable when if you're providing an extra or something that's you know unknown to the client, that you're always showing them, hey, we as a builder do this, that we're going to cover this cost. It's a $0 changer.
Mhm.
Maybe it's goodwill. Maybe it's a freebie at this one time, but here's the actual cost, right, of this change. Because it may be $0 to them, but it's always important to advise them and show them, hey, we're doing this as an extra. So, the whole thing is that emotional bank account. You want to keep
Oh yeah.
depositing that emotional bank account. So when that time comes, you have to withdraw. You can go back and say, look, I've done this here. And so then hopefully you put enough goodwill into it for them.
Well, Brad, there's that statistic. I actually really wish I knew it offhand, and it relates back to like positive and negative reinforcement, right? So for every negative withdrawal that we experience, you need it's some crazy number. It's like 5 or 7 positive things to counteract
Yeah.
that. And if you look at that on a personal relationship spectrum, like right in all of our personal relationships, it's so true.
Yeah.
Like, you remember the negatives. I don't know. As my husband would tell you, I'm very like, right, we hang on to the negatives, and to counterbalance the negatives, you need so many more positives. And I actually, just to circle this back to design firms, I do think design firms, there are certain firms that are better about showing non-billable FF&E, like, right, that
Mhm.
because, and is it because of, I actually don't know. That'd be a good question for me to look at. Like, why is it easier? It seems like it's just a lot easier in terms of communication. And then it's all of that non-billable time that I do feel like we're constantly reminding firms or reminding firms, or if we're doing the design fees at a firm, like if we're responsible for doing everything related to billing, that's a really big conversation of like, how can we show this to the client? It would be really important for them to see all of these non-billable hours.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really good. Now, as you look at, these designers, are most of them doing cash or accrual? Does it vary depending on whether it's the fixed fee or the product line, or design fees? Like, how are you working through those two
Yeah,
aspects of the financial?
great question. I'm a big advocate of accrual, and so I actually think to a really good design, a really good software for this industry will only be accrual. So just
Mhm.
to studio designer is only accrual. We have so much, the firms, right? We have so much money tied up in work in progress, right? Which is all this product, probably again similar to your space. Like,
Yeah.
we could have lead times of 36 weeks,
Yep.
24 weeks. We had a 24-week lead time, but then something got delayed.
Mhm.
Shipping got delayed. The international crate was delayed into the receiving warehouse in California. We have so much money, both on the client side and the vendor side, tied up in product. And product could live in work in progress for as long as the project is ongoing. And if the builders are delaying it, that trickles down. So I personally, I really do think accrual is the best way to go, the only way to go. But I am also an advocate, and I say this to all of our, not necessarily to all of our clients, but anybody calling me, or anytime like I'm speaking. So at design camp, I said it often. I said, if you don't know, that's okay that if you don't know which way you file, but find out. And then really also find out if you should be making the change and when, because there's a tax implication to that. And so
Hmm.
there may be a perfect year to do it because switching from cash to accrual actually shows right a loss and that'll help you on the tax side, or vice versa. On the vice versa, I would say, well, let's hold off and let's push it. Why would we switch from a year where on a cash side we're going to go a smaller amount than if we would switch into accrual that year, right? So you do need to do an evaluation, for sure. But and I think sometimes too volume has a lot to do with it. So if your gross revenue is $200,000-300,000, right? There's not that much in work in progress versus if your gross revenue is 2 to 3 million,
Hmm.
there's a ton in work in progress, and that implication on the tax side could be really really big.
I love that you broke this out because where there's a lot of commonality is, of course, I'm accrual too. I think every contractor should be accrual.
Yeah.
It's just the length of projects, the complexity, the delays, the right. There's so much you have to be monitoring, and the problem is if you're monetizing and capturing profit in your mind too soon, it can come back to really bite you, right? Especially if you're off on your projections.
Well, and especially, but on the tax, like I can't tell you how often we see this on the tax side. When
Yes,
you have
right.
a new client and let's say a larger new firm and they come in, and I'm like, what do you mean you're filing cash? You're going to show a profit of $1 million last year, but really you should have been paying vendors and you didn't. It doesn't even
Hmm.
matter. It doesn't even matter why, but you didn't. And
Yeah,
so you want to pay taxes on 800,000, and then so think about how that works then. So fine, so that you were overstated one year, but then this year you figured out that you did owe money to all these vendors, and now you're going to show a loss, but your loss is only a loss carry forward, right?
yep,
That helps you moving forward, but what do you
yeah,
do with the giant liability? What if you didn't have the cash for it? I mean,
yeah.
I don't think that conversation is happening enough with tax preparers, and really to clients and to a firm's defenses. I think they don't know. And then I think, well, we're in such a niche industry, similar to you, that tax preparers aren't asking to be able
Hmm.
to say, though I don't know, I don't understand how, but if you're sending somebody a balance sheet, right, client and vendor deposits are so big, but I just don't think it's a proactive. I don't think it's a proactive enough conversation.
Well, the problem is, to your point, I mean, ideally you would have a CPA that like understands construction design, but at the same time, it's very complex. I mean, if you don't have a good understanding of WIP and how that impacts it, to your point, I mean, if you're forecasting 800K and there's AP that hasn't hit your account yet,
Oh,
you're writing a check end of year, 350,000 to the IRS. And to your point, now the next year is showing, yeah, it's insane. And that's cash
yeah,
out of pocket. You got to pay right away. And then
yeah,
the next year, if you're showing a loss, well, if you keep having this up and down too, does it open up for an audit? Does it, raise a red flag with the IRS? And
yeah.
then, so there's levels of complexity, and then that's where a lot of companies become cash poor, and they're not in a good financial position to, adjust properly and run their business.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I see it, and it really is. And honestly, I do think it's so eye opening to people when they realize that they could that they could switch, and there's a way to
Hmm.
account for it correctly. And so yes, sort of forget taxes, though those are equally as important. But when you're then trying to understand, are you actually profitable? You have no idea, because
Hmm.
it's the same. It's sort of the same question of, well, I showed $800,000 on paper, but I didn't. Right, that's not my true profit. I owed all this money, but in a different period. So if you're not accurately recognizing
Hmm.
both revenue and cost of goods, you really have no idea where you are in terms of margin. And then you could dissect that further to say, not only do you not know in terms of margin, but then you also don't know like what you're selling, what you're selling well, what you're selling and not charging or marking up enough. You're just flying blind.
I again, I could talk to you about this for hours, Julie. This is awesome. Like it's just you're so knowledgeable about that stuff. But what's interesting about that, about the flying blind comment, is that to your point, where the strategy comes in, is that if you really understand that WIP, if you really understand where you're at financially, to your point, what you're making is that now you can strategize and really look, hey, we're making a lot of money on X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
We're not making very much on A, B, and C. why are we not focusing our business here and position ourselves? And this should be the ideal client. This should be what we should be pursuing. Because the problem is a lot of us as builders or designers are kind of taking this big pool of stuff and saying, well, yeah, we can do this scope, we can perform. But if there's a better, bang for the buck here, why are we not focusing that? And the only way to do that is really having a good understanding financially of where you're at fiscally.
And so I know you use an industry specific software, right? Co-construct.
Yep.
Yes. Yes.
Which is Builder Trend. Yeah. Same. Yeah,
Oh,
Builder
right.
Trend. Yeah. Builder Trend.
One bought out the other or something,
Yeah.
right?
Builder Trend bought out Co-Construct. So
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, sorry. Okay, I
Yeah.
actually thought it was the other way.
You're good.
And so, do you track revenue and cost of goods by category?
We do. So we have it all broken out. And this goes back to your point about WIP is that to me, WIP is where everything lies, right? Because I have to be very accurate on WIP, and then I have to be very accurate on, what my indicated outcome is from the very beginning to, as we're projecting that monthly, so that as we get to the accrual point, we kind of know we're going to end up in December, so we can strategize in June or, August. Problem is, if you're any business owner and you're sitting down strategizing with your WIP and cost of goods sold and AP and AR that's sitting out there, if you're waiting till September, October, you may not have enough time
Mm-hmm.
if it is going to be a profitable year to strategize
Mm-hmm.
around that. But if you're doing that in January and then, April and then July, you could be in a position to know, different, diversification and investments. And maybe, there's a lot of options that you have.
Yeah, so we've seen again, I'm assuming similar to you. So 2022, 2021, 2022, and 2023 firms were really, really profitable.
Right.
We were super, super busy. So we were constantly evaluating and really strategizing and doing it in a way which I would say was fair to everybody. If that's a statement that makes sense to make sure that we weren't overstating, meaning if I could push certain things off in terms of WIP and show that installs were later, because I was already extremely profitable, we were definitely doing that. And then obviously vice versa, really making sure that we captured revenue in the correct year, to make sure that our profitability was in line with other years as well. But that was, again, those 3 years were not necessarily the norm in terms of net profit, at least not what I've seen in my entire career.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird bubble, if you will, and it is slowing down. You kind of see this kind of correction where it's people are still busy, but it's not, it's not
Yeah.
phone's not ringing every week like it was. Um, Going back to the WIP, do you find that challenging to educate designers on WIP? I mean, how has that been working with your clientele?
I think people don't get it at all.
I love the honesty. That's awesome.
So no, you do try to relate it. I mean, I constantly talk about like installs and what does that mean and when do we recognize revenue? When is the right
Mhm.
time? And there's not necessarily like there's not the exact answer, I think, for the exact firm, right? Like every firm's process is going to be a little bit different. Do you, as a firm, do you hold the contract with the receiver, or does your client? Because if your client holds the contract with the receiver, our last sort of point of responsibility for product will be when it gets to the receiver, not necessarily when it gets to the installation, even though then we're going to be charging for the installation and running it in a separate way. So, I mean, yes, we are having that conversation, I would say, all day, every day in some sort of capacity.
It's really good. So now to kind of circle all this in a nutshell, if you will, as you look at WIP and making sure that they're doing cash accrual, or I'm sorry, accrual instead of cash.
Cool only.
Yeah, accrual only. Yeah, let me speak clearly and clarify that. And you kind of touched on this early in the conversation about designers maybe not understanding the freight or their time that goes into a project. Where do you see their focus, or where should it be, so that they can increase profits?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. Everywhere. I mean, I know, maybe to narrow that down, software. I would say really focus
Hmm.
and understand. Are you using a software that's specific to your niche and to your needs? So, we pick on QuickBooks, right? So it's an Intuit product. It owns market share, right? It's super user
Hmm.
friendly. It's inexpensive. It's serving all of these needs and all of these gaps. But is it the right tool for your business? The answer to that, and I can answer it, is no. It's not, and that's okay. And it may be great for a designer that's generating 150,000, maybe 200,000, but you're going to outgrow it at some point. So why not start good habits out of the gate and good information out of the gate? So software, and I think, and I picked on accounting software because obviously I love it, but
Yeah.
software across the board, time tracking software, project management software, accounting software, um, and just like an Asana Monday, which is more right to do like to do lists or
Mhm.
whatever. But we that's where we build so many of our processes around software that I think you really need to be able to answer that question for yourself.
Do you, I mean, you're super knowledgeable about all this stuff, Julia. Do you ever find yourself consulting design firms on, how they should set up their organization, not just from an accrual basis, but also maybe whether it's an LLC or, sole
Oh,
proprietor?
for sure. I mean, we have that conversation a lot, right? Like, what type of entity structure are you, and
Mhm.
are you the right entity structure, right? Most, or I would say, actually, everyone should start out as an LLC, right? Everyone wants some layer of protection. I'm not at all a fan of a sole proprietor, right? Unless you're really doing something on the side and you're making handbags. I don't know, that's just what popped in. Then that's okay. But really, it's a couple $100. You could do it yourself. You could use an attorney for it, but really set up an LLC to make sure you have some protection, right? And so from there, the next bigger conversation is, when is the right time, and there usually is one, to convert to an S corp. Um,
Mhm.
so much of that has to do, in my opinion, with revenue, and not necessarily top line, but actually bottom line. Where are you net income wise? And would you have tax savings if you were to convert to an S corp? Usually the answer is yes. This goes back to the cash accrual. If you don't know, that's
Mhm.
okay, but find out. And if you've never had that conversation with somebody, pick up the phone and ask.
So, from it's fascinating the knowledge you have on this, not just from the entity, but just the total operation. Um, what's your background, Julia? Like, how did you get into this?
Um, so my background is accounting, and I went, so I worked 2 years out of school for a real estate developer, actually, which was beyond, and it was before the 2010, right before that, or the 2008 crash, right before the 2008 crash. And so it was actually super fascinating. And after 2 years, I they were doing some things a little bit unethically, and I really couldn't get behind it. And so at that point in time, I decided to try it on my own. And I did. And how many years later, here we are.
That's amazing. So, taking that first step, though, I think this is important for any entrepreneur, business owner. I can understand not wanting to continue on from an ethical standpoint, but there's still that fear of the unknown. I got to find my own clients. I got to market. I got to build my business structure. What did that look like early years?
So funny. In the early years, I remember my first go around, I sent 75 hand typed letters to local businesses. I got callbacks right away, and just really, I think, grew and expanded from there. So we were in the early days, we did hospitality, not for profit, and interior design. So those were the bigger group, like, right, the bigger segments of the accounting firm. I would say after only a couple of years, I probably made my first hire. I actually don't really remember how many, two or three. And then now we're almost up to 20 people, and only at this point working with interiors.
Mm.
So it's been a super fascinating ride. No complaints, no regrets. Very interesting, learning every day. And it's an industry where it's evolving and it's changing, and like, technology has an impact, but like I said, I feel like we're behind the times a bit in terms of, I don't know if you could relate to that, but I think the interior design firm is, we need to be, in terms of processes, we need to be in a different place, in a better place, in a more efficient place. Maybe that would be a good. Um, and we're so much more than accounting these days, which I don't think I realized actually, probably only a few years ago. Where, I mean, the crux of the firm is absolutely accounting, right? It's debit and credit. I love it. I could look at it all day long. But it's just working with the design firms and the business owners to understand their structure, their deductions, their processes, their staff. Are you short staffed? Is staff overpaid? How does somebody's salary compare to somebody's billing rate? So it's been great so far.
Well, apparently, I mean, what's unique about kind of your whole operation, in my opinion, is I think it's pretty rare to have someone that has a really clear understanding of the design world business, right? That's first and foremost. So you really understand that space. Second part is it's one thing to call it manage the books, right? To do monthly financials and do AP and AR and everything that goes into it, and cost of goods you're managing. But when you're looking at strategy and software and entity structure and taxes, I mean, you're offering a lot more than I think most financial firms out there.
Well, thank you. When you want to rebrand our website, you feel free.
Yeah.
It lives on the
So
web.
you're not a marketing expert as
No,
well? Like,
no, marketing is I suck. uh, it's very organic, right? So like you're working with these firms and you're working closely with principals, whether they be large or small, and having, I mean, now it's, back to back to back Zoom meetings, but to really understand how they're doing and what they're doing. And so all of these conversations are always happening very organically.
mhm.
But yes, definitely so much more than just the basic accounting. But makes it much more interesting, right?
Well, yeah, it keeps you on your toes. I mean, so how did you meet Lindsay?
Oh, how did I meet Lindsay? So through Studio Designer, which is this software that I'm obviously a big fan of. They know they don't pay me to say that. I just genuinely believe in the product. They felt like, so for Design Camp, they felt like I would be a natural good proponent of it, and I am. And so that's how we got connected.
That's amazing. And so, and for reference, so Lindsay Borchardt with Lindsay Brook Design. I mean, she is one of the co-founders of Design Camp Ride, and that's how we met. You and I were both out there at the same time. What hit it off? What made her pull the trigger to say, "Julie, it's time to get you signed up"? Without getting too personal, I mean, I'm just saying in
Yeah,
general.
right.
Like there had to be some relationship where she's just like you're introduced, and there has to be like I know anyone listening to this podcast, just to give you some credit, they're going to be like, Julie knows what she's doing. I'm calling her right now. We need to get signed up because you're very thoughtful. You're very like your business, right? You know our business, which goes a long way.
Yeah. Well, thank you, thank you. No, she definitely had some, I would say, ineffective tax strategies. And that really led, I think, her to doing some more digging and maybe due diligence that then led her to realize that things were not where they needed to be. Um, and then that led, to greater conversations with myself and with us. And then as soon as you started looking at financials, there was just some gaps in terms of better approaches.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. So now as you look at your customer base, I mean, how's your business growing? I mean, when you look at your internal structure from your staff, like how have you hired and grown to service so many clients?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, hiring I would actually think is very hard because we're so niche specific.
Hmm.
Just as funny, another studio plug. So like we just had somebody as a studio designer employee. We were able to recruit them through studio, but that switched to our end actually last week. So that's been a new change for us. We're all super excited about it. No, it's hard. I mean, it's it's one thing to know the accounting side, but then it's another total world. It's just a completely different world to then understand the project, what I call project management, but it's really the project management meets accounting side. And so that process needs a set process and needs set protocols, and then you need to know the software. And the software is robust, and I'm sure everybody has their own opinion of the negatives and the positives, but it covers a lot of bases. And so like think about builder trend, right? Like how many fields there are, how they all relate to each other. And so if you don't know what you're doing, or if you know what you're doing, kind of, think about the negative repercussions of what happens on the accounting side when you're doing something sort of totally unrelated on the project management side.
Yeah. There's a lot to it. And from your side, Julia, as you look at this, I mean, um, going back to, some of the benefits and strategy that you offer, I think what's interesting is early on in the conversation, you mentioned that you are servicing clients, LA and New York, all over Atlanta. I mean, all over the country. So you have a good idea of what people are charging hourly. You have good
Yeah.
context. And so how do you work with your clients to know what they should be paying their employer or what they should be charging themselves for design? Because I know it varies by market, but I would imagine you have a pretty good grasp of where they should be and help them, to get to
Yeah.
that value.
So, and I would actually say, like, not necessarily how long a firm's been in business is an indicator, right? I mean, you could have a brand new firm of 3 years that's doing phenomenal and is already on the 8100 list, right?
Hmm.
So, the project size is a good one. And we are constantly having conversations about, I'm looking to hire a senior designer. What would that salary range be? I usually always give people like New York, LA as a frame of reference, and then we tear down from there. Um, but as we're looking, as new clients are coming on, and we're looking at their total design fees. Let's say if somebody comes on now, we'd be looking at 2023, and then we'd be understanding or working with them to understand what's their typical project scope, and then from there, like, okay, but in addition to that, how many years in business? Then that's a good indicator to say, and what type of, like, project scope is a big one in terms of, are you just doing light decorating, or are you really doing everything from construction administration all the way up to install, right? In your full service, that's a different type of firm, and that's
Hmm.
not good or bad, right? But it's different. So we could give some pretty good ranges, um, for sure.
Do you, as you look at your clientele, right, as you're working with certain designers, is there a minimum they have to do? Do they have to be full design firms? How do you navigate just who you bring on to work with?
It's another really good question. When you're ready to rebrand the website, I'm telling you. Um, so I would say no, not necessarily a minimum, but I will say a desire for improvement and
Hmm.
process is critical, right? Or is ideal. Like, you can't work with someone who's not willing to follow a process. And I'm not saying everybody's process is the same, but everybody needs a process, and everybody needs an efficient process. And so if I come to the table to say, you know what, I really think we're being inefficient, and I really think we could tweak maybe this and this, and it'll really help our communication and in your firm and our firm, and et cetera. And if somebody is not willing to do that, right, that they're just not the right client for us personally. And we have some really phenomenal sole proprietors that are not sole proprietors. They're LLCs, but they're one person. So, and they're outsourcing quite a bit, but they could be generating up to $1 million in revenue. Absolutely. Three to 400,000 in design fees, and the rest in product income. So that's a think about how hard, right, that client obviously is working, and how effectively they need to follow process, because there's too much going on for them not to. So those types of clients, I think, for me, are the best, or clients that call to say, you know what, I need to make a software change, or I know I'm not doing things well, or can you help me, with this and this. Those are the calls you want, because you want to be able to help them with all of these different things. And that means that they're open to it, as opposed to somebody who's constantly on the other end saying, you know what, this is hard. Well, it's like life is hard, right? It's what you tell people. It's hard. Like, I
Life
get it.
is hard.
Okay. It's like hard for me to wake up my life is hard. Like, I get it. Okay. But what are you going to do about it?
Yeah,
So for me personally, that's my big differential.
I love that. I mean, it's really good counsel. And from that aspect, do you ever find it difficult where, I don't want to say sticker shock because we won't get into pricing, but there's an investment, right? To have someone that's really skilled on the other side, and that investment always pays dividends. And as you mentioned, that tax strategy, entity strategy, making sure you're capturing costs, it's so multi-layered. Do, do you find that designers have to be at a certain point of business where they're like, hey, I'm ready to take this next step and hire Julie and her firm? Or, or do you have some that range that have been in business 10 years and some maybe 6 months?
Uh, Total range. No, I would say sort of no rhyme or reason. I really would say attitude.
Hmm.
And some may really just be like, you could be, again, one person, you could be really busy, and you just don't have enough time for what they call the super boring business accounting side. And so for them, it does make sense, because then they're able to be creative. And we want everyone to focus on their strong suits. My strong suit is not picking velvet, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Um, and you know what else is interesting is we should all know what we're good at. And again, it's, I think, recognize for clients to recognize that. And when they do, probably similar to your field, and really any field, that's when they know that it's the right investment for them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really good. So, best advice you've been given.
Oh, and, how about, if you're not growing, you're shrinking?
There you go. It's good. Yeah, and that quote is absolutely perfect with what you're speaking about today. And what do you do for fun?
I'm a big workout enthusiast.
What kind of workout?
Well, it's so interesting. I CrossFitted for a really long time, 11 years. I mean,
Wow. Wow.
hard,
That's
hardcore,
hardcore. Yeah.
hardcore. 6 days a week, 2 hours, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours a day. And
Wow.
then it was a lot. And then last year, I discovered hot yoga. And though I'm not in a traditional, though I will take a traditional Bikram class, but my husband and I take these hot like yoga Pilates classes, but with weights, and it's been the best. I don't know. I think I needed an energy shift in life.
Mhm.
It's been the best. It's been the best. It's just been the best.
Yeah.
So
Everyone I know that does hot yoga like swear by it. It's awesome. I've done it a few times. It's killer, especially when there's weights. It's killer.
I mean, it's and ours is. I'm telling our studio, and maybe we haven't found a studio hotter. I mean, it's like 120.
It's
I
awesome.
mean, it's humid. You just sit there for the first 5 minutes and you're dripping. That's when you know. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be such a good class. I haven't moved, and I'm already disgusting.
I love
Um,
it.
it's the only place in life where nobody needs anything from you.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Julia, I mean, I
Thank you.
honestly could probably talk to you for 2 or 3 hours. You just are so full of knowledge, and um, hence the reason we caught up at four hands. Like you just have so much information to share. So, for those listening, where can they find you if they're looking at reaching out to enhance their business and get the right teammate on board? Where do
On
they
my
go?
super amazing website.
Yeah,
Um, no, but I mean, our contact information is on there. So it's newagefinancialconsulting.com. Make sure you spell it right. And then send an email. I mean, I'm the first one to say always, I'm happy to, I talk to anyone anytime just to understand like where you are, what are you doing? What are you looking to change? Am I the right fit? What do you need help with? Because it's so important to do that, to understand everybody's needs.
that's amazing. Well, Julie, you've been amazing. I appreciate making time for the hour today. So, thank you so much. If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.